Constructivism is the constructivist learning theory. It was developed by Jean Piaget, and he noted that people actually learn by doing. Jerome Bruner agreed that we do learn by doing, and that this was actually a discovery of learning. So rather than memorizing some facts that were spat out by a teacher, to just memorize and get a reward, which would be like a grade, he decided that the actual discovery process was powerful in retaining the information, which was truly learning. Snowman and McCown, 2015, explained Bruner as someone who believed that true learning was using their knowledge that was already gained to solve problems and find solutions, either independently or in a group. And they quote him saying, "It was figuring out how to use what you already know to go beyond what you already think." And what I love about the way that this has been expanded as a theory is that it's not just that you do something and you discover. Sometimes it's guided. Like when you go outside and you ask your students, what are you seeing? What are you smelling? What do you hear? Those are words that help them to discover. It's not just go outside and figure this out kind of thing. You're guiding them through this learning process. Snowman and McCown, 2015, explained that there's 4 basic parts of the constructivism theory, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail about each of those. As we've already stated, the first part is that a person actually has experiences that they are learning from. So it's things that they can easily recall and things that they didn't just memorize and forget. It's things that they actually saw and did and experienced firsthand that they can testify that they know. The second component to constructivism is the amount of social growth that students experience because they're sharing with one another their discoveries and their experiences, and the other students are listening. And I just think it's really great to use each other's strengths to learn things, and it really teaches students to listen and to share and how to grow in a social aspect. The third aspect of constructivism that's great is there's a self-regulated learning that happens, because although students can be in an environment where there's a lot of different views, they are taking their prior knowledge and experience and they're building new knowledge and experiences based upon looking back on what they already know to be true and factual. The last part that Snowman and McCown identify about constructivism is that it's realistic. And what that means is that students don't just, memorize things short term, as we already discussed. They're taking their knowledge that they learned prior and they're solving real life problems. So to me, that shows a real sense of learning. There's a few things that can make constructivism as a method of teaching kind of tricky, and one of those things is that it takes a lot of time to allow students to discover rather than just dictating what needs to be learned. Another thing is that you really have to have the attention of your students, and they need to be very active in the learning process. And to have your students active in the learning process, you really have to know how that student thinks to be able to kind of guide them along. And then if you're going to do groups, you have to really be able to take the time to plan out those groups so that you have different view and knowledge of students being put together to get a good roundabout answer and discovery. So yeah, it can be kind of tricky to use this theory at times. For myself, I know that I've truly learned something when I can recall detail and I can explain things. For me, that comes from my learning experiences. It's not things that I've memorized. Those things, when you memorize just a bunch of things for a test, so difficult for me. I just don't retrieve the information the same. I feel like it's bits and pieces in my mind all jumbled together. I do think that if I realistically think of like a classroom setting, that constructivism is probably not practical to use in every way of teaching and for learning. There are times that you really just have to teach certain facts in a very organized and clear way, and students sometimes just have to memorize certain things, and it's necessary. So you can be the judge if you think constructivism is an actual way of learning, which is retaining information and recalling information, not just in the short term, but in the long term. I'm going to give you a couple examples and kind of try to put yourself into the situation and just see, hey, would I learn looking at it that way, or would I fall apart? I really think if you think about the situations I'm going to give you, you're going to love it. Okay, so constructivism for science. Let's talk about solid, liquid, and gases. And I think if I were teaching this, I would probably identify what a solid, liquid, and gas is to students, but then I would allow them to use constructivism through exploring and discovering what this actually means and how they work together and change and come back to each other. So I would give my students resources. So for this lesson, I would give them a solid, like an ice cube. I would give them other things like a way to freeze things. I would give them a heat source, and I would let them just, with supervision and with guidance, but you're allowing them to explore how an ice cube can actually become a liquid, or how you can take that liquid and boil it and make a gas. So then when students get back to their seats and you can go in more detail about what they discovered, you can later give them a quiz and you can say, what happened when you had that solid and you applied a heat source? They're gonna think about that experience they had and go, oh yeah, I remember. It turned to a liquid. So here's the thing. It's experience. They can pull on that and give answers. The constructivist learning theory can even be used in subjects like math. I'm going to give you an example right now of how you can use pool noodles to teach fractions. So give each student one pool noodle and ask them to cut it in half, and then to cut those pieces in half again, and then to cut those pieces in half again. And what you would end up with is 8 pieces that are the same length, roughly, depending on the age you're working with. But then you can put them kind of back together and see how it makes a whole again. You can learn 1/8. They can put them together and kind of say, oh yeah, that's 1/4, or that's 1/2, or put all 8 pieces back together and go, I have one whole, which would be 8 out of 8. But instead of telling them that, 2/4 and 2/4 equal 4/4, or 8 out of 8 equals a whole, they're discovering. I just think this is a great way to learn. And you can even take it further by giving each student 4 pool noodles so that they can lay them side by side and have one as a whole, one that's cut in 2 pieces, one that's in 4 even pieces, and one that's in 8. And then they can kind of line them up and see how these fractions are equal. So I just love the idea of discovering with math like this. So where the constructivist learning theory really began, that people learn by doing, I do agree with that, but I love how this theory has evolved over time, and that it's not just that you do stuff, but you have a guided process, because especially like in a classroom setting, you want to have your students learning the materials that you're supposed to be teaching. But we guide the students and we allow them to discover the learning outcome. So whether it's the pool noodles or the solid, liquid, and gases, I think students can take those experiences and be able to explain how things work together for the answer that they got. And when they don't necessarily get the answer we were looking for as an educator, I think it's important for them to be able to experience that and say, oh wow, I got a different answer and this is why. But in that, it's kind of cool because then you can discover new things too. It's not always one particular outcome. They could vary that experience a tiny bit and go, wow, I discovered something new. So even though in a classroom you need a lot of smaller amounts of other types of learning, I still love constructivism, and I really think it's the best way to retain information for the long haul and for students to learn to work together, and then when they get to the next grade, they're building on what they learned and they're not just all this jumbled information in their head. Don't you think constructivism is unique and really fun? Are you ready yet to give it a try? I hope so.